Our anime today begins with the faint memory of a star, in which a young girl proceeds to tell us that we are in the kingdom of Midgard and that we were summoned through ancient magic. The goddess, for her part, introduced herself as Nolan and apologized with great regret, since she had the soul of an innocent in the midst of other people's problems. This confuses our protagonist a little bit, since he thinks if he was summoned, it should be because of something great. Nolan clarifies that the Otherworlder summoning randomly selects from countless targets across a multitude of worlds. It rarely affects people who weren't meant to be a target. So in short, the guy is now in great danger, because the difference of magic and strength that exists between World A and B are very different. With anger, the goddess mentions that despite all the risks, the nation activated it under reckless conditions, but thanks to a nearby nation, they managed to do it. Leaving that aside, Nolan is here to provide solutions to any kind of problem, but our protagonist only asks where all the others who were summoned are. The goddess reveals that the proper targets of the spell were safely summoned to the place where the spell was activated, the Holy Cydonia Empire, and even if the right thing to do was to send him back to his world, Nolan mentions that she got so ticked off that she patched things so they could never use that forbidden spell a second time. In other words, our protagonist can never return to his world because of her, and he even had no body since technically he wouldn't have to be here. But not everything was ugly according to the goddess, since he could start a new life in Midgard. This brought the doubt to the young man of why not send him to Cydonia, since the other 3 humans were sent there. The goddess tells him that the Holy Cydonia Empire is a problematic place, and since he was caught up by accident, his treatment there would be rather awful. Nolan feels kind of guilty about all of this, since he can't go back because of her. So at least she took care of giving him her support, as well as sending him to a neighboring nation with her goddess blessing. And knowing that in Japan video games and fantasy worlds are famous, Nolan offers him a life just like that. Even though he didn't like the idea, the goddess reminds him that he has her super support, so all he has to do is try to will status. After doing so, our protagonist gets a new name, which is Takumi Iruma, a 17-year-old human with no job. This is kind of strange to him, since he used to be a salaryman of 40 years old. However, salarymen don't exist on Midgard, but he can choose between hero and warrior. Between these options, if he wants to aim for an adventuring one, there's swordsman, mage, night thief, and hunter. On the other hand, production jobs include herbalist, alchemist, blacksmith, carpenter, and others. Takumi, not wanting to get into fights, immediately chooses production jobs, and the goddess explains to him that by mastering the first skill, the following ones will be unlocked. Plus, she also gives him a special magic crystal with her blessing, and a nice trip to the continent of Asgard. Once he arrives, Takumi notices his new physical appearance, which is not bad at all, and in his bag he finds a supply of food and some money. In his stats, he can see the blessing of the goddess, so he decides to keep that a secret and never tell anyone about it. One of his skills is Item Box, and he also has magic, so he thinks it would be fun to try, and the first spell he uses is Water Ball, which he acquires just after using it. This led the young man to try out more wind and rock-type elemental skills, but since this world is like Minecraft, he first has to find a nearby house or village so as not to spend the night alone. When he finds a nice piece of wood, his appraisal skill informs him the kind of things he can do with it. Being the easiest one, he decides to make a spear with his blacksmith skill, and collects a lot of plants and ingredients he finds nearby. He gets a little carried away and picks a lot, but with his item box, everything is stored quite easily thanks to the goddess. In that moment, a young girl runs towards him and asks for help, since she's being chased by a wild, giant rabbit. Without thinking about it, Takumi defends himself with the spear, managing to beat the rabbit with just one blow, though he knows this must be the goddess doing, who feels kind of flattered, but knows his strength did everything. That aside, the system counts that as a combat, so he earns the warrior title level 1 without wanting to. The little girl thanks Takumi and explains that she was just picking medicinal herbs and strayed into the forest. Since she's from a village, Takumi decides to go with her and stores the giant rabbit in his item box, though he realizes he probably showed something he shouldn't, to the little girl, whose name is Molly. Now in the kingdom of Cydonia, we see the 3 summoned humans who at that moment did not know where they were. One of the girls, named Akane, just wanted to know where they were, and at that moment, a woman welcomed them all. She tells them that they're on another world, and she needs them as heroes for its salvation. Even though it's a lot to take in, the woman introduces herself as the first empress of this Holy Cydonia Empire, Elizabeth. At that moment, Akane learned the revelation skill that Nolan had granted her, which is in a few words a super powerful intuition that will guide the young woman to the correct answer. After seeing her, Akane knew that the princess was not someone to be trusted, so she would have to be careful with her. Back with our protagonist, he returned the little girl to her home safe and sound. Banga and Martha, Molly's parents, couldn't be more grateful that their little girl was safe, so they offered anything to Takumi, who was more than happy to just spend some time in the village. Bobon, for his part, was the village blacksmith, and he offered him to stay as long as he wanted in Board Village, though unfortunately for him, they had no inns. That's why they give Takumi a piece of land to build his house, and he starts by leveling the ground with his skill, though that shaves away most of his mana, making him feel exhausted. The villagers can notice this, so they ask him to rest while they take care of the rest. After that, in no time, Takumi's house is finally finished, though he wonders if he can change his job. When he sees that it is actually possible, he immediately changes it to Alchemist, and with iron ore, silver ore, and copper ore that he mined with Bobon, he decides to turn them into ingots. Normally that would require a large furnace to melt them in, but this is a fantasy world, so he can finally do alchemy. It is generally composed of 5 techniques: decomposition, extraction, pulverization, then synthesis, and recomposition. He used all of that to finally create an iron ingot, though this skill made him feel tired as well because of the mana consumption. Despite that, Takumi can't help but to feel happy, because he's using magic, so he decides to keep going non-stop. Later, we see Molly visiting his house, but when she enters the place, all she finds is Takumi laying on the floor after passing out from using too much mana. That only earned him a great lecture from Martha, since this kind of magic can't be trained alone. At the end, with a healing potion, he recovers completely and continues his alchemy, and this time, Martha and Molly watch over him so he doesn't go too far like last time. Over time, ingots became easy to make, no matter what material they were made of. Thanks to that, he was able to make utensils and other tools, and his alchemist level skyrocketed to level 32, and blacksmith went to 36. After all, together with Bobon, he worked in the late evening making multiple weapons. This, in addition to having to be a blacksmith's magical assistant, gave him a lot of experience making weapons, though unfortunately for him, it was easier to level up as a blacksmith than as an alchemist. Later, Takumi went straight to Banga to ask for some potions, as he wanted to examine them so he could make potions with medicinal herbs himself. That's how, after a few odd combinations in his personal pot, the young man ends up with 2 potions that have different colors. Although he did not know why, perhaps he thought it was because of the ingredients, and when he tried some new ones, he found the bad luck that one was totally poisonous, and only thanks to his cure skill did he not lose his life. In turn, as bad luck would have it, a wild animal appeared to fight him, one with skin so tough that not even a knife or spear could pierce its body. With nothing else to do, Takumi was forced to use his Windcutter spell along with Rock Ball, but even this was nothing to the wild boar. And as if he didn't have enough bad luck already, there was a poisonous spider near him, but noticing that it was injured, he knew that it wouldn't hurt him. At the same time, the spider decided to attack the boar for no reason, but only ended up more injured, and Takumi would be next if he didn't do something quickly. So, in a last attempt to save himself, he used alchemy magic to stop the attack since he had a good level in it. Even though he managed to beat the monster, he wasn't the only one injured as the spider from before was greatly injured by the boar. Takumi decides to cure it as a thanks, knowing that the spider was trying to help him. However, the system informs him that he just tamed a wild animal, giving him the option to accept it or not. Of course, the spider's puppy eyes didn't help much to make him say no, so without any other choice, Takumi accepts it. Though he has to give it a name, and goes for Maple, because the pattern on its back looks like a maple leaf. Thanks to their bond, Maple was able to both evolve and heal its damaged leg, so the spider couldn't be happier. Later, the townspeople noticed how Takumi had defeated a giant armored boar, and also that he had a spider on his back. But when he clarifies that he tamed the spider, no one else worried, since a bond like that is enough for it not to attack anyone. Without further ado, all that was left to do was cook the wild boar so that everyone in the village could feast. Finally, the night came where Bobon was glad to have the leather, skin, tusk, and remains of the animal, since they would serve well to make strong armor. Though it would be better to sell the skin in the city when he has to go, as they would pay a good price for it. This reminds Takumi that he doesn't know where the nearest city is, so they tell him that Bolton is the nearest to the village. After that, Takumi goes to play for a bit with his pet, while Bobon and Banga mention how happy they are to have him in the village. Despite that, they know he's not the kind of person to stay in such a small village forever. In another place, we see how a woman kept seeing into the distance, and even the goddess is seeing how Takumi is doing, feeling proud for giving him her blessing. Near Nolan, another goddess wants to know what she's hoping for from him, because granting him a special body and her blessing, and most importantly, sending him 1 whole year into the past, before the Holy Cydonia Empire activated their summoning spell, is not something a goddess does for nothing. Nolan clarifies there's no particular meaning to that, so she'll just see how far he can go with his skills and ideas. Now we are with Takumi completely immobilized by Maple's webs, something that he evidently protests against, since she can't do something like that to him while he sleeps. The spider apologizes for what she did, but he has been very busy and she gets very bored. Takumi understands better what is happening to her, and recognizes that lately he has only been dedicated to making potions and other things. That is why he apologizes and tells her that he will not work today to play together, something that makes Maple very happy to the point where she starts jumping on him. At that moment, Martha comes into the room to bring him something to eat, but she enters a state of shock when she sees Takumi trapped and at the mercy of the spider. He immediately clarifies that it's a misunderstanding and the spider isn't trying to eat him. Once she hears that, Martha approaches to better observe the spider silk that Maple has created, showing a terrifying look that leaves them scared. Later, she shows off a piece of clothing that she has created to the other women, where she clarifies that she has created it with spider silk, praising Maple for giving them the luxury of doing this. Because Takumi does not know about the subject, they explain to him that spider silk is very valuable, so much so that it is used in luxury items and all the nobles buy it. There, Martha asks Maple to produce a thread with a bit more elasticity, but Takumi tells her that she cannot understand speech. Takumi is surprised that they can hold a conversation and approaches Maple to ask if she doesn't want to play together, but Maple points out that she has work to do. Because of that, Takumi separates himself and agrees to let her have fun. After all, he also has things to do. It's been nearly a month since he came to this village, so he would like to go to a city to study alchemy, but he doesn't know how to say it with how well he has been treated. The next thing he does is visit Bobon so that he can fit him with a light chest plate, as well as some boots that allow him to kick well. Takumi finds it strange since he works as a producer, but Bobon makes him see that no one with a creation job goes through a forest of monsters alone. At that moment, Banga joins them to see how they're doing, as he knows that Takumi is moving on to another city, and for him to grow as a producer, he has to go to a city with a higher demand for materials. Bobon tells him that a trader from Bolton is coming next week, and Banga agrees to talk to him so that he can let him travel on his carriage. Once they decide all this, they set out to finish making his armor, and Takumi thanks them a lot for everything they are doing. Later, Takumi goes to greet Martha, whom he asks what she has in her hands. She explains that they are the innards of a horned rabbit Banga hunted, and they are the most delicious part, but if they are not treated, they can have parasites and diseases, and because they cannot be purified here, then they must be thrown away. After listening to her, he tells her that he can use purification magic, so he does not hesitate to use it to be able to clean the impurities from the entrails. Martha is surprised that he can use light magic, and after thanking him, she advises him not to use that magic in front of other people. There are very few people who can use light magic, so few that those who do make a living from it alone. She doubts anyone here would care, but he better be careful once he's out of the village. A week goes by as Takumi focuses on Board Village's defenses through his magic, having the wish that the villagers can live safely and with all the comforts possible, because he wants to repay them for all they've done for him. After some time, the trader named Popek finally arrives in the village, kind of surprised by how advanced they are compared to before. When he finishes discussing Banga's requests, he tells him about Takumi and introduces him to him afterward. Before leaving, Takumi takes out a potion and lets Banga know that he left 100 of them at home, giving them permission to distribute them when needed. Popek is really interested in that potion and asks him about it, so Takumi tells him that it is a basic healing potion that he made on his own. After that, Popek analyzes it more carefully, but they are interrupted by Martha when it is time to say goodbye. She, along with the others, gives him an ideal piece of clothing for him, which they made so that he would be well presented. This is when Takumi sadly says goodbye to everyone, because he really appreciates what they did for him. Once he's in the carriage, he's very aware that this is the first place in Mildgard he ever lived in. In that moment, he meets Heath, Ryle, and Bogar, a rank C adventuring party known as Lion Fang, the bodyguards for Popek. They are drawn to the bag he is holding, and Takumi calmly tells them that it is his familiar, the killer spider. This makes them surprised that he has tamed something like that, and curiously Ryle gets too close to take a look, but this makes Maple jump on him. While they are distracted by the spider, Popek asks Takumi if he has more stock of the potion from earlier, as he is very interested in buying it. Suddenly they are interrupted when a group of goblins gets in the way, something that the adventurers begin to take care of, eliminating the monsters in a matter of a couple of minutes. Maple thinks Bogar is amazing, she doesn't like Ryle, and Heath is just average. After that, the journey continued without incident, and 3 days later, they arrive at Bolton, Kingdom of Barkula. Everything looked new for Takumi, who headed for the Adventurers Guild along with the 3 members of Lionfang, who were going to report the success of their escort quest. He has to register with the guild in order to stay in the city, and to register Maple as a pet. And even though he would have preferred to register with an Alchemist guild if possible, unfortunately, there isn't one in the city. Despite that, many people use the guild card as identification, or at least that's what the receptionist Hans explained to him. The lower rank card doesn't expire as long as he completes 1 assignment a month, so in the end, he decided to join the Adventurers Guild and register Maple as his familiar. After this, he visits Papek's company to do business with him, and he shows him that he has about 100 potions of each in stock. This leaves Papek delighted, offering to pay him for the basic healing and stamina potions at 10 silver each, and the mana potions at 50 silver each. As soon as he hears this, Takumi gets very excited, because after doing the calculations and the conversion, that would be about 7 million yen, and so he asks him if that is not too high a price. Papek explains to him that since he is not a renowned creator, he would be paying a little less than average. Takumi thinks that this seems too good to him, but he wonders why he is so good if he has just met him. For a moment, he thinks that he may be hiding something from him, although he does not seem the type to deceive people. Suddenly, Papek changes the subject by talking to him about where he can live, because if he wants to establish himself as a creator, he recommends that he lives in a residence with a workshop. Takumi immediately rejects the idea since he can't afford to buy a house, but Papek explains that if he'll settle for a rented one, he can show him one right away. Before he can respond, he rings a bell to call his employee Thomas to take him to that house. But when Takumi finally sees what he recommends, he is shocked since it turns out to be a whole mansion. Thomas informs him that the monthly rent is 1 gold and 50 silver per month, something that Takumi thinks is quite good since he can afford it if he sells the potions. And after confirming that there is nothing wrong with it and that Maple likes it, he accepts this great offer. After this, he walks with Thomas, who tells him that he will go fill out the papers so he can move tomorrow, but suddenly Takumi is distracted by an odd smell. Thomas asks him if it bothers him, and Takumi admits that it does, as it is something he has noticed since he arrived in the city. Thomas explains that it is the sewers, and that the nobles use magical purifying devices to treat the sewage from their mansions, but it is not enough. Magic purifying devices have to be excavated from dungeons or ancient ruins, so they're too expensive, and they don't purify the sewers at all. Some priests are hired to purify them periodically, but that doesn't solve the issue completely. The next day, Takumi and Maple finally move into their new home. Here, he decides to handle repairing the walls at a later point and focuses on something more important. He mixes quartz into the clay he purchased from the Papek company, uses magic to shape it. Once it's dried out, he adds heat by adjusting the temperature and shortens the time it needs to bake by using space-time magic. Finally, he strengthens it and sets the shape along with a few final steps, all this process making him go up a few levels in the skills he is using. After finishing, he doesn't hesitate to take a good amount of mana potions, as it turns out to be more exhausting than he thought. Despite that, he accepts that it is totally worth it. This because he was finally able to create his toilet, something he wouldn't change for anything in the world. Suddenly, he hears a scream coming from the entrance, and when he looks out to see what it is, what he finds is poor Papek trapped by Maple's spiderwebs. She explains that she was just receiving him, but Takumi scolds her, since that is something only the kids from the village would enjoy. To his surprise, Papek begins to feel in heaven because of the incredible texture of the silk, something that leaves Takumi speechless. After he is released, Papek asks him not to worry and to show him where the restroom is, but a few seconds after entering, he asks him what kind of bathroom this is. Takumi explains that it is a toilet, which has a built-in magical device, which purifies everything when one does their business and divides it into clean water and inorganic matter. When Papek hears him mention purification, he asks if he can use light magic. This takes Takumi by surprise, as he remembers well the advice Martha gave him about keeping that kind of magic hidden. Having no other choice, he asks him to please keep this a secret. Papek seriously accepts his request, but asks him if he could create 100 more like these, showing genuine interest in this. At first, Takumi finds it strange that he wants 100 toilets, but he replies that if he gets the materials, he thinks he can do it. Papek thanks him enthusiastically, and now focuses on the fact that he will need manpower to do this great task. Takumi agrees with this, even planning to hire someone to help him. After listening to him, Papek recommends slave contracts. Considering his talents and aptitude, the house and his escort should be run by slaves who will not reveal his secrets thanks to contract magic. He is able to use light magic, which means he is a divine chosen by God, or so the Holy Cydonia Empire, leader of the Divine Light, claims. The Church of the Divine Light welcomes light magic users and makes huge profits using healing, so they will not look kindly on the spread of this toilet with purifying magic. For that reason, Takumi asks him if it will be safe to make them, and Popek answers that he has already thought of how to gain support for that, but they will not be able to make his identity public. And because of that, he should sign a contract with a slave, but Takumi clarifies that he would prefer not to do it, since it is a word with bad connotations for him. So much so that he prefers to do it alone than to have a slave, something that Popek does not agree with since it would be impossible for him to continue like that. Suddenly, Takumi's guild card starts to glow, and upon checking it, he sees that there is a message. He is informed that the Adventurers Guild requires that, within a month, he completes a quest of the appropriate level, and although they know that he will be busy, he must approach the guild before the deadline. With this order in mind, Takumi understands that he really needs manpower. Popek decides to take him to the Mulan Company, the most reliable of Bolton's slave trader companies. When he reaches the entrance, he asks him to wait for him a moment, but Takumi goes a little further to admire the beautiful landscape ahead. That's when he notices a girl who stands out quite a bit among the flower petals flying through the air, but to his surprise, she asks him to go home.